Hamilton wrote, the other 51. How do you ride like you're running out of time? Right day and night like you're running out of time. Every day you fight like you're running out of time. Like you're running out of time, or you're running out of time. How do you ride like tomorrow won't arrive? How do you ride like you needed to survive? How do you ride every second you're alive? Every second you're alive, every second you're alive.
Patrick Hruby, welcome to the Other 51. Thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
So it's funny. I usually like to start out talking about some element of pop culture that my guests listen to or talk about or watch or whatever. And I was thinking about, following your writing and following you on Twitter, and I realized I don't know anything about your pop culture. You're very all business on social media, in terms of what you put out there. Is that a conscious decision that you made?
I don't think it's a conscious decision. It's just one of those things where for me, social media, I'm 40. So for me, I didn't grow up with social media being an integral part of my social life. In fact, for me, there's a real remove always between, the social media to me doesn't really seem totally real, if I could put it that way. It definitely is a work tool for me. So yeah, my Twitter feed is a lot of business stuff, commenting on things I see in the news, I guess. Occasionally I'll put some personal things on there, but for the most part, it's not a personal device for me, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And it's interesting because, one of the things that sometimes we teach, and you've been in my class, sometimes we teach is, and you hear is you want writers to kind of, they're urged sometimes to put out some personality, kind of put themselves out there, especially with social media, with something like Twitter or maybe Facebook like that, in a way to connect with the audience. So I just find it interesting that you keep that very separate.
I think my personality definitely comes across. Sure. I mean, the things I have to say about what's going on in the news definitely reflect my personality. I'm pretty sarcastic on Twitter, which is a very sarcastic medium, but that fits me.
Right.
It's probably why I like it better than Facebook. I mean, I probably log into Facebook once a month, and if I didn't have to go on there to put up stories for work, I'd probably never use Facebook. It doesn't really fit my personality at all. So I wouldn't say that it's not personal. It's just something where I'm not really interested in sharing my thoughts on a new movie or something like that. I might, but I just don't feel a need to. So I think it's probably, in terms of what you talk to students about, they're native to this.
Right.
This is what they grew up with. To them, social media is all an extension of themselves. There's no real distinction between the social media world and the actual physical, tangible world around them.
Right.
For instance, I'll give you one more example of this. Like I said, I'm 40 now. When I'm in my early 30s, there was a whole rash of stories about cyberbullying. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure it still goes on, but it was a real big deal in the media at that point, I guess because adults were discovering this was happening. Without sounding totally just insensitive and terrible about it, I tried to put myself back in the shoes of being 10, 12, 15 years old. And there was a level where I couldn't really understand cyberbullying vis-a-vis actual being bullied in person.
Right.
Because I just thought to myself, well, Jesus, if someone was cyberbullying me, I just turn off the computer and go do something else.
Right.
But I think that's a generational thing. Because I don't think if you're a 10 or 12-year-old now and you've been using an iPhone since you were 2 years old, you emotionally connect with it that way. To you, it's all the same.
Right.
So, I think, without getting too deep here or too philosophical about it, I just think that's kind of difference. And that's, for me, I came to social media as something to promote my work, and so it probably just sort of keeps more of a work mindset to it.
Right. And it's funny the way, and because I'm turning 40 this year, so we're the same generation, and it is why it's that weird generational disconnect. Why we would think, why don't you just turn off the phone or put down the phone, and they would think, how could I possibly turn off the phone? I can't. My life is in there, and not in a kind of vapid way, but in a very real way to them. I don't think they can conceive of a world without these platforms. So yeah, I think that's an interesting generational gap we're seeing between us and, I guess, millennials. Right.
This is, and post millennials. This is good. Again, if your listeners are young, this is great. You're hearing two old men yell at clouds right now.
Right. Two old white men yelling at clouds.
Right. Right.
So I wanted
I hope that answers your question in terms of why. Like I said, I think my personality comes across, but I don't know. It's not something that I really use to sort of share my thoughts on every single thing. I also don't use it regularly all day long. First and foremost, it's something where I want to sort of either comment on what I see in the news or get out things that I'm writing or other people advice are writing or things I like that I want other people to read. And also Twitter is a different kind of social media platform than some of the other ones. It's a very news-oriented and journalist-oriented kind of platform. It's not nearly as popular as some of the other ones.
Right.
If you go to Twitter, there's lots of funny and interesting stuff on there, but it's largely because at some level you care about what's going on in the news, or you care about what's going on in the world, or you kind of like to read. It's still sort of a links and commentary platform more than anything else. It's not like Facebook or like Snapchat or something where you're always sharing the minutiae of your everyday life, or you're sharing your very best pictures to present the best picture of yourself, or you're like using it to plan and organize friends or events or things like that. Twitter fills a much more specific and smaller niche, and I think you see a lot of journalists on there,
right?
Because it works for what they do with work. And I would say there's a lot of journalists I follow who don't particularly talk a lot about pop culture or their personal lives on Twitter, but you get a real good sense of their personalities anyway.
That's a good point. So I'm wondering, I've been a longtime reader of your work and admirer of your work, Sports on Earth and Vice, and the subjects you cover. And it's funny, when I was preparing my notes for this episode for the interview, I wrote down that you tend to write about the unpopular issues of sports, and I say that with all respect. And I'm wondering, first of all, how did you come about this role that you were writing primarily about stuff like concussions in football, amateurism in the NCAA, sports stadium welfare? How did you get to this point?
Well, I think it's a mix of personal interest and sort of the economics of journalism at this point, which probably sounds counterintuitive, but let me sort of explain. A lot of people probably don't know this about me at this point, but I used to write for ESPN.com, and specifically I wrote for ESPN.com's Page 2, which doesn't exist anymore. That's where Bill Simmons got his start. It was kind of like the weird, offbeat humor place for sports stuff on the internet, before there was Deadspin, before there was like a million different blogs, and then after blogs there was the Twitter, and then there's sort of the things that were being done on Page 2 are done everywhere now. That's why Page 2 doesn't need to really exist.
Right.
You don't need sort of a different, offbeat, irreverent piece of ESPN. That DNA is everywhere. But it was sort of like ESPN's version, to use an even older reference, of Spy Magazine, which I don't think, again, people who are younger may not know what Spy Magazine was, but Spy Magazine was this satirical magazine in New York in the 80s and early 90s that I would argue is one of like the 5 most influential publications of the last 30 years. Like Spy Magazine's DNA is literally in everything we consume in media now. Again, that's why Spy Magazine also doesn't exist anymore. It's sort of it's one of those things that was never a huge, subscription-based kind of thing, but it influenced everything. And then the guys that created it, one of them is the editor of Vanity Fair now, and just sort of like you look at the alumni list, and it's all sorts of people that have gone to tremendous success in journalism and in the larger culture. Page 2, I'm not going to say was the same influence as that, but the same kind of thing. So I was writing a lot of humor stuff, a lot of offbeat stuff. When the Great Recession sort of happened, it happened concurrently with ESPN having my contract up for renewal, and they weren't renewing contracts anymore. Also, I think in the long term, they were getting rid of Page 2. So I had to sort of shift, what am I going to do with my career? I also was, again, in my early 30s, kind of deciding, at some point with humor, you age out a little bit. I really think that humor sort of changes with every generation, and especially irreverent kind of humor. What works for people in one set of shared experiences doesn't work for the next set of people. So I kind of realized, before I worked at ESPN, and even when I was at ESPN, I also did serious stories. I did in-depth stories. I did reported stories. I felt like, it's time to go back to that. That's where my future is going to be. That's where I'm going to be able to make a living at this. There's a lot of cheap, free, sort of irreverent sports humor stuff on the internet now that anyone can do. The price of that's been driven way down to zero. Whereas, good reporting, good stories, real journalism, the market is shrinking and continues to shrink, but there's a chance there. There's a chance that I'll get paid for that. There's a chance I'll get a good job for that. So that's what I did.
So What about these, you can add any of the other issues that you write about, but looking at concussions, looking at NCAA amateurism, looking at the stadium welfare, what about those issues kind of really got to you that you kind of made reporting on them and writing about them kind of central to what you do?
A couple of things. First of all, I'm just personally interested in them. I think they're really fascinating. Two of the reasons I'm personally interested is that I'm attracted to them the way journalists are attracted to a lot of things. They perceive an injustice that's going on. They perceive something that's wrong. They want to shine a light on it with the hope that it gets changed for the better. I would say I'm definitely motivated by that. In these particular issues, I also personally feel like this is something I even tried to do at page 2 when I wrote humor, which is I always felt like sports were a good way to teach and show people about bigger issues that go on outside of sports, but the sports angle makes it accessible to them in ways that they wouldn't be accessible otherwise.
Okay.
So a really good example of this would be with the NCAA. And what I write about the NCAA and amateurism and the problems with it, in a lot of ways, it's really about antitrust, but what it's even more about is the concentration of economic power. And what the bad results of that are within a society.
Okay.
So the NCAA is kind of a microcosm, I think, arguably, for a lot of what's happened to America in the last 30 to 40 years. And has led to a lot of the economic problems that we can't seem to figure out, and we can't even seem to agree on how to get out of them or what to do about them. In my opinion, again, this is getting a little deep, but in my opinion, what you've seen in America since the Reagan years, essentially, is the concentration of economic power. The conservative movement in America is very concerned about the concentration of government power, but is not concerned about the concentration of economic power. Both those things can be really harmful. In my opinion, the economic concentration has been extremely harmful. You have a lot of quasi-monopolies now in American business life. And there's a lot of results of that. One of the biggest results is the people at the top who have the power, who run the system, tend to either influence or write the rules in ways that benefit them more. And they get a bigger and bigger slice of the pie, and everybody else gets fighting for the scraps. And that's exactly what the NCAA economic system is. It's the schools that run it, get together, they collude through the NCAA, they form a union, if you will. They set these rules that allow them to keep the lion's share of the money that's being generated by the on-field labor force. And the labor force is essentially restricted to getting very little. So I don't think it's a huge stretch to look. If you really start to understand what's happening in the NCAA in terms of the, strip away the romanticism, strip away these guys get a free education. Nothing's free if you have to do something for it. That's not free. If I give you a present on Christmas, that's free. If I give you a present with the expectation that you have to wash my car in return, and the second you stop washing my car, I cut the contract of your present, that's not a present. That's a quid pro quo. And that's what's going on in the NCAA. So it's not free, but when you strip away all those things, I think what you see is that kind of system. And I think that system reflects a bigger issue that's going on in this country. So in a small way, I'm never going to say this in a piece I wrote at the NCAA, but I'm hoping to sort of bring people along into thinking about these bigger picture issues and seeing how they work. So sports is kind of like the gateway drug.
Right. It's interesting because when you talk about the NCAA and over the past, 10, 12 years or so, I came around like full bore into athletes should be free to be compensated for their actions. I used to be very much on the other side. And I think I may have mentioned this when you talked to my class, but what changed my mind was when I went back to school to get my doctorate. And when you're a PhD student, the schools fund you. You get full tuition scholarships, plus, you're not getting rich, but you get, 15,
well, and
20,
different schools make you different offers,
absolutely.
I assume.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Some don't, some schools don't offer you anything. Some schools offer you a lot, and that makes a decision. But, and all of a sudden that was kind of like the real light bulb moment for me of like, there's no reason they shouldn't be doing this for athletes as well. And that was really kind of the turning point for me. But I think one of the things that always strikes me is it's about that restriction. It's not about, whether it's fair or not and they get the free education, whatever. It's that students can't get more, and the market would be willing to pay them more. Like boosters at Kentucky would pay pretty good money. And it's that restriction that I think is the most odious part of the amateurism. Is
right. That's the whole problem. It's not the terms of any one particular athlete's deal. It's the overall terms of the dealing. It's the fact that there is this agreed to uniform restriction in what would otherwise be a robust competitive market, which is something we're all supposed to like and we're supposed to think is good and is good. Like the reason we have antitrust law and the Sherman Act is because competitive markets produce good results.
Right.
And that's okay. And in the rest of American society, we accept and celebrate that. We just carve out this one really weird exception for college athletes. And it's because of all this it's because it's amateurism mythology. It's because it's the way we've always done it. It's because there's been 100 years of NCAA propaganda about it. It's because of all the sort of things the NCAA puts out there, or the sky is falling parade of horribles that would happen if schools were allowed to just freely make offers on players. Oh, we wouldn't be able to afford anything. We'll have to shut down all our sports teams. The athletic departments will go broke. They won't be good students anymore. Something I just wrote about the other day. I mean, just a ridiculous parade of things that, and this gets to the other thing that you asked me earlier. Why do I write about these subjects? One of the other things that drives me on this subject is that there's a common denominator to a lot of them, is that we have a tendency in American society to look at sports and treat sports and act as if sports are somehow off in this separate universe from everything else we do. It's kind of like the fun the people always say stick to sports, but we really kind of culturally believe that. We have this. It's like we sort of with sports remain like eternally 5 years old on the inside. And we sort of act like they're this magic place where none of the normal rules and issues and problems and things that happen all around us apply.
Right.
So the case of amateurism, nobody would accept amateurism in any other part of American society. Like if your employer tried to do that to you, if your labor situation tried to do it to you, you take them to court and you kill them in court. Just like assistant college basketball coaches went to court and slammed the NCAA for trying to limit their salaries back in the 1990s.
That's right.
Like nobody would accept that in any other thing. You talk about the concussion issue. I mean, that's a people talk about it as if it's a matter of like football rules and how tough football should be or not be or something. This is just a workplace safety issue. This is a public health issue at the youth and high school level, even at the college level. This is an ethical question. Should schools be in the business of a sport that has a significant risk of brain damage or not? They're schools. Does that really go with their mission?
Right.
Those are the kinds of questions we should be asking about it, and not asking questions about, is that, did you target him? Is that an illegal hit? When people sort of limit their frame of understanding to just sports, I think they're really missing out on what's actually happening. And that's kind of a theme of a lot of stuff I write, which is you can say to yourself, stick to sports. You can say to yourself, this is different, but it's not different because these are all real people and sports exist within society and within the law and within the economy. They don't exist separately. Just because, there used to be these things called newspapers. I don't know how many listeners are familiar with them, but just because the newspaper sports page is its own little section of the newspaper doesn't mean that's actually how sports work. And like I said, we have a real tendency in American culture and society, and even legally, to give sports this sort of wide range of deference that we don't give to other things. Another example, again, the concussion issue. If youth football was a consumer product like Buckyballs or something like that, it probably would be banned right now, or at least would be regulated much more heavily. If you could buy youth football and give it to a 6-year-old, and you look at sort of the dangers that are inherent to it, I'm not sure you'd be able to sell it to 6-year-olds. I'm not sure you could install youth football on a youth playground. You look at some of the safety regulations around there. I mean, probably you could make arguments for it, but I'm not sure you'd be able to do. I'm pretty sure tackle wouldn't apply. So that's kind of what I mean by we look at sports like they're different. They're not different. A lot of what I write is to point that out.
Well, and it always seems to me, this is an argument I always make, is that we make sports about a larger point when it's one that's either kind of socially acceptable or we want to. My argument against to anyone who ever says stick to sports is, what number does every baseball player wear on April 15th? 42. Why? Jackie Robinson. Why? Broke the color barrier. Okay, so it's okay to celebrate that, but not bring politics into other sports, when that was probably the most political sports act maybe of the 20th century. And it's just so disingenuous that, I said this on a radio show.
I think go ahead.
No, I said this on a radio show once, nobody's ever telling Ted Nugent to stick to music. And so it's always a very specific area of stick to sports.
I think the thing with that too is the idea that things aren't political. I think when people say that, I think they mean two things. I think not everything is partisanly political, I think is what they're trying to say. Sure. But I also think what they're trying to say is, I don't like what I'm hearing.
Right.
So if you agree with something, it doesn't seem political to you. It seems like common sense, right? Mm-hmm. But when it's something that offends your sensibilities, suddenly it's political.
Right.
And I think in a bigger sense too, the whole idea of sticking to sports doesn't make any sense. I mean, politics at its basic level, it isn't about Republican, Democrat, partisan. Politics is very simple. It's about who gets what in society. That's it. It's about who gets what. That's the most simple definition you can have of politics, and that encompasses everything. And if you kind of look at every quote-unquote political debate in sports, that's generally what they boil down to.
So what's your we have all these big stories and big topics that you write about. How do you, getting granular, how do you pick what to write about, what angle to take on it? What's kind of your reporting and thinking and writing process look like?
I mean, like anyone, I look for good stories. So if there's just a story that seems like it has the elements to be compelling, you always want a story, if you can find one, that feels relevant, that feels fresh, that hopefully has some sort of personal character or narrative that's very emotionally compelling, but then speaks to a larger issue that's also sort of intellectually compelling.
Right.
That's hard to find. That's not every story is going to have that. That's kind of like I think every journalist, that's kind of like the dream that they look for when they look for a story that's going to be worth their time and effort and really be a story that's worth reading for the readers. You think about sort of a reader, there's so many things to read, there's so many options to choose from. You want to give some people something special, something that matters. So I mean, if anything, you look for something that you think matters, I think, first and foremost. If you don't care about a story, if you don't think it's important, it's going to be kind of hard to write in a way that makes a reader think differently. I always tell people, writers, if you're bored writing this, I'm going to be bored reading it.
Right.
So that's kind of like the first thing. So I do think you look for things that you find interesting. I feel like a lot of times, I'm thinking about, like all journalists, how can I advance this story? You're not usually starting from scratch with any particular story. It's part of a bigger issue or narrative or something that people know something about already. So what can I provide that's new or different or illuminating? Right. Those are kind of the main things I look for. In terms of where I get the actual ideas, I mean, the biggest thing I do is I read a lot. As I've gotten older, I have and I've gotten more specialized in terms of having a couple of areas that I know really well. I know lots of people in those areas. The sports welfare area is a pretty small world. The concussion area, it's a pretty small world of the people that are really involved and really care. The NCAA area, it's a pretty small world. Over time, I've developed these sources. These are people I talk to regularly, even if I'm not writing about what we're saying all the time. Like any journalist, right? You're developing sources, you're keeping abreast of a field. So a lot of my ideas on those fronts come from not so much reading stuff anymore, or it might be reading stuff, but I don't even have to find it. Someone sends it to me. Hey, this is going to publish this concussion study is publishing 2 days from now. Take a look.
Okay.
Stuff like that.
Sure.
I mean, that's more where I'm at now with those particular subjects. With broader subjects, it's still the same thing as I've always done, which is I read a lot, and I ask myself when I read things that I think are interesting, what didn't I learn here? What do I still want to know about? Oh, there's a throwaway line about someone in the story. I bet that person has an interesting story themselves. I'm going to call them. And some of it is just following the news cycle, too. This is also what, especially in the internet age, journalists do. there's a big story or a big topic that's kind of going on. It's either breaking or it's ongoing. And you're thinking about, okay, I've seen what's sort of out there. What hasn't been said yet? How can I add value? If you're thinking about how you can add value to something, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I love asking that. I love that idea of asking a question, what didn't I learn here? That's something I think for journalists, as a researcher, when I do my research, that's in every research articles. I'm sure you've seen, you have the little conclusion where they're like, further research can examine blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And that's where, what's next on this. And, it's that pushing a story along, especially on these big topics, I think is really, really critical, because it's kind of like that pushing this understanding forward a little bit. And every little article you read on it, you learn a little something new, or you get a new nugget of information or a new way of looking at the issue. And I think when you're talking about big social issues, I think that's an important role that we play as writers and journalists, is kind of that slow trickle of information rather than the big blockbuster.
I think it's also really important just to be curious. Like, I don't know. I mean, if you're not a really curious person, journalism probably isn't for you. I mean, now curiosity can take different forms. Some people are intensely curious about other people, and they become really great profile writers. Some people are extremely curious about. This a lot of journalism is essentially what people don't want you to know.
Right.
So if you're very curious about like what secrets are out there, what's being held away from the public, what's being, that. You're going to be a great journalist. Like, you're going to be someone getting really important scoops, right? That's really important.
Right.
There's all kinds. Some people are sort of intellectually curious. They're curious about the big ideas, right? Like, how do things fit together? How should they're almost like philosophically curious. Some of those people are the absolute best columnists, right? They see the bigger picture. They take these scoops and they take these personality profiles and they sort of weave them together into like, what does this all really mean? So there's lots of different ways, I think, to engage with journalism with your curiosity, depending on the type of curiosity you have. And I think that's good because we need all of that.
What type of curiosity do you think you have?
I'll be honest, I'm definitely more interested in sort of like how bigger forces and ideas and agendas shape our lives on an individual level, for better and worse.
Okay.
I think a lot of the things I write about are sort of like, here's the system, or here's problems with the systems, or here's things you're not thinking about the system, and why it matters is because this actually has impact on you. I think the concussion issue is a big example of that, where a lot of what I'm trying to write about or explain, whether it's some of the science or whether it's some of the especially the way that industry interacts with science to sort of set policy or shape public policy and public opinion on this, right? Like, and how some of that parallels what you see with other industries that produce products that cause harm. That only all matters because in the end it matters because it might be your kid on the field, or it might be you deciding to play football. Or it might be your husband who played football and now is dealing with the after effects of brain damage, and you're trying to figure out what to do and what happened. That stuff really matters when you, like I said, when you connect it to the bottom line effect on everyday people. I think that's when it's the most interesting and best kinds of stories.
So I remember asking you this when you Skyped into my class, and I'll broaden it out a little bit. So of all the issues that you kind of write about, and I know you're really active in engaging people on social media and debating these issues, what's the best comeback or counter argument you've heard to your point of view? Not one that's changed your mind maybe, but one that you at least say, I don't think that's right, but that's now you're at least kind of arguing the right area now.
I mean, look, I'll give you a couple of examples. On the amateurism issue, right? On the NCAA amateurism issue, when people say, well, if we get rid of this restriction, in general, it's going to cost more for labor, right?
Right.
That's true. It is going to cost more. So when they say, like, well, I'm worried about where am I going to find the money for it, like, that's a legitimate point. Right? Like, but it's a little less legitimate from a standpoint of all the other costs in the college sports system are not fixed.
Right.
You don't have to pay a coach $6 million a year. You choose to, and it's easy to make that choice when you have $6 million lying around that's not going to the players.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have to pay your golf coach $250,000 a year. You don't have, I mean, we have it set up right now, but we don't have to have it set up that the golf team in the Big Ten also does a Big Ten travel schedule.
Right.
Why can't the golf team at Maryland just play local schools? It would be fine. Just spend less money on that. Like, again, that does not to say there's not going to be some different winners and losers. If you have to redistribute more cash to players, then athletic directors are probably going to make less.
Right.
Coaches are probably going to make less. The golf team is probably going to get less money. But it's not impossible that you can do that and still have golf teams and still have coaches and still have, and it's like any business.
Right.
Very few industries that are multi-billion-dollar industries that are successful collapse because they had to pay market wages to their primary labor force.
Right.
We just don't see that historically.
Right.
So I think, like I said, when people express the concern, I talked to an athletic department person, and they're just looking at their spreadsheets, right, of their current budget, and they're like, well, crap, I don't really have much slack in this budget. What am I going to do if suddenly I'm expected to pay football players more, right? Or to get good football players, I might need to pay more, which is what we're really talking about.
Right.
And my answer is always like, well, you're going to have to do what everybody else does, which is like when one expense goes up in your life, you got to find a way to make the other things work. But luckily, in your case, your costs are pretty inflated across the ledger here.
Right.
Because one thing about athletic departments that we know, they're nonprofit. They're incentivized to spend every dollar they make. And if you look at the history of athletic department expenses, yes, they've been going up and up and up. And guess what? They're going up right along line with the revenues.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells you something.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that I think, again, I think it's a legitimate counterpoint, but it's not a very deeply considered one.
Right. It's at least arguing kind of like, at least we're arguing about the right things now, as opposed to like the myth of amateurism or like there'll be terrible students or whatever nonsense.
Yeah, it's not like saying like the NCAA literally argues in court, if athletes had the chance to make money, they'd spend more time trying to do that than doing what students do, which is what they mean studying. And again, like that's ridiculous. 2, we don't apply that standard to anybody else in the world. And 3, athletes already spend like more hours than most of us do at our full-time jobs on their college sports. If they were free to get paid and someone wanted to pay them for that, they'd essentially be getting paid for the time they're already spending.
Right.
So it's not really like they'd suddenly start studying less. It doesn't make any sense. And if you talk to any athlete, they'll tell you that. So it's a very disingenuous argument. And there's stuff like that. Yeah, I think it's just sort of it's a waste of time. And the point, most of those arguments are so disingenuous at this point now. Like, I'm not even sure if the NCAA really believes any of them. They just put them out there to see who will bite on them. But yeah, I mean, when I see those, honestly, there's a point now where I don't know how many of your readers have seen the latest Star Wars movie. Mm-hmm. At the very end, Darth Vader shows up in the hallway.
Right.
Like, that's kind of how I feel when I see these arguments now. Like, I've just had it with them completely. But I also just know how to cut them down. So it's kind of like, that's sort of it. I think on some of the other issues with the sports welfare, there really isn't a good argument that cities and municipalities should give billionaires money for sports arenas. There is no good argument. Like, there's no economic. It's been studied over and over and over and over. There's no real economic benefit. In fact, and this is something any economist will tell you, you would get more local economic stimulus by taking money and dropping it out of a helicopter over a city than you would building a stadium. Like, it's sort of like, because all a stadium does is like slightly shift where local people are spending their money. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, you just gave away a bunch of your money to a billionaire. Because again, the other thing about those two, so some people will argue, oh, well, we're paying for this with tourist taxes and other things, and we're not actually, you're not going to actually have to pay for this. Well, you are paying for it, because every dollar of a tourist tax you're spending to like service the bond on some multi-billion-dollar stadium, that's a dollar you're not spending on your roads or your schools. There's an opportunity cost there.
Right. So
you're always paying for it. That's money you could be raising for something else. Mm-hmm. Or you could be giving yourself a tax break with that. That should appeal, for people that don't like government spending and don't like paying taxes. if you're gonna suddenly have a tourist tax on your hotels to pay for a stadium, why not just institute a tourist tax and give yourself tax break for people that live there? Like, I mean, that's what I mean. Like, there's no real justification for it. There's no real benefit. You're just basically socializing risk and privatizing profit. If you're somebody who didn't like the bailout of the Wall Street banks, which is most people didn't like the bailout of the Wall Street banks, and at least that was arguably necessary to keep the entire American economy from shutting down, there's an argument to be made that's more important, even if it's very odious to give, again, to privatize profit and socialize risk. In this case, there's no economy. There's no downside to the public if you don't build a new stadium. The downside is a team might try to move somewhere else where they will. But if everyone in the public just agreed not to do this, it wouldn't happen. So I don't think there's a really good argument for subsidizing sports, especially professional sports, which are a very, very lucrative and successful industry. If you're a billionaire team owner, you can do what other billionaires do when you want to build a new corporate headquarters. Go out and get financing. That's why we have the big banks. That's why we bailed out the banks to be able to do stuff like that.
Right.
So it's not a problem. The third one, I guess, would be on the concussion issue. A lot of people will just sort of argue, we don't really know all the answers, which is true. Scientifically, medically, we don't know exactly how getting hit in the head multiple times leads to different types of brain damage, including like progressive, neurodegenerative diseases.
Sure.
We don't understand all the mechanisms of that. We don't know why some people end up with that and some people don't. We don't know why some people end up with very minor brain damage, some people end up with no brain damage, and some people end up with quite a bit of brain damage. We suspect and assume that there are other factors, genetic factors, lifestyle factors, nutrition, you name it. There's probably a lot of things that affect it. But we do know that getting hit in the head over and over isn't good for you. And it's really a question of how bad is it going to be. It's kind of like smoking in that, although in smoking we actually understand more directly how the carcinogens in cigarettes lead to cancer, right? But we also know that some people smoke forever and are fine, and other people don't. It's a risk factor. It doesn't have, and that's what I think some people will say, well, we don't have an exact clear cause and effect relationship here scientifically, so we really shouldn't do anything. Well, we shouldn't err in caution on the side of protecting humans. We should err in caution on the side of protecting a sport. Right. And I think that's really backward, and I think it's a weird way to look at risk where you know enough to know it's a risk factor. And the idea, I mean, like anything, it's a cost-benefit thing. And to me, is a human cost worth the benefit of sports entertainment or not? And I think a lot of people, when they make the argument in favor of, hey, we got to slow down, let's not go crazy, we don't need to like ban kids from playing football, we don't need to cut down on practice stuff, we don't need to make football all wussified, whatever the argument is, I think a lot of ways what they're really arguing is, I'm prioritizing entertainment over human health. Right. Which again, is fair. That's something people do. People who are boxing fans do that. Right. People who are Tour de France fans do that. I mean, a lot of sports are not actually at the elite level very healthy for you. And I'm not saying that's totally wrong. I'm saying that's the ethical question we should be asking. And I think we should be asking it honestly. And I think in a sport like football, we're not really there yet. We're not really asking those deep ethical questions as a society yet, the way that we sort of ask and accept them about something like MMA or boxing. Right. We're much more honest about those sports, and I think that's where we need to get to in football. So when I hear that argument, it's not that I think it's totally wrong. I just think it's sort of eluding the real issue.
What's the best thing you've read lately?
You know what? The best thing I read lately is a piece by Jason Fagone. It was on the Huffington Post Highline. It's called "What Bullets Do to Bodies." Oh, it's not a sports piece, but it's about what bullets do to bodies, and it's talking to like trauma surgeons in Philadelphia. Oh wow! And it's incredibly affecting. It's again talking about politics and sports. Gun control. And guns are obviously a hot button issue in America and always have been and probably always will be. This piece, I think, no matter what you feel about that subject, and especially if you are like hardcore, I want an arsenal in my basement, I should have an arsenal in my basement. I think this piece will make you at least reconsider, what are we really doing here? Because the one thing we really don't talk a lot about is, what does a bullet do to you?
Right. And it's a great, I haven't read it, I'll put it in show notes for this, but it's that kind of great thing of, I think great journalism can do. It's this kind of like unanswered, the obvious question you never thought to ask. Like, you get shot. Okay, we talk about gun control, but no, granularly, what happens to a bot? What does a bullet do a body? That's such a simple question, but it's so unanswered and so fascinating.
Right, and that goes to what I was saying earlier about like the best journalism is stuff that connects big questions, big issues, big problems with what's the bottom line effect on an everyday person, like that, and that's really because like. That's if you're a reader, you think about what's the effect going to be on me, because we're all selfish, we're all self-centered. No, we are. That's just human nature. But like that's what a lot of times what opens us up to being empathetic, to thinking about other people, to thinking about our obligations to society, to thinking about how we want to do things collectively, is we start by thinking about how it's affecting me. And I think that the best journalism taps into that. And this piece really taps into that. And I think some of the best pieces on concussions. They're not the ones that talk about in depth, like the sort of brain science and the research and the arguments by lawyers over who's really liable to pay for this, which is all important. But the best pieces start out with like, what's it like to be a brain damaged football player? What's your life like? How does it affect the people around you? Like you read about that, it's powerful. And then you want to learn about the bigger questions, because now you have those questions yourself.
Right.
And I think that's what this piece does.
Yep. I'll put into show notes, too, a piece like that I just thought of. Tim Graham for the Buffalo News did a piece on Darryl Talley. It must have been a year and a half, 2 years ago now, and about how he's, the problems that he's had with post-concussion syndrome and in his post-playing career. And that was so affecting up here. I'm from Buffalo and live in Rochester, but that's so affecting up here because Talley was just such a beloved member of that Super Bowl era team. And he was the guy, and then to read through everything he's gone through lately, that's the kind of almost personalizing it in a way for the fan to be like, oh, this is what it does to him, to this guy we loved and this tough guy that was an icon on this.
Well, look, it's a little bit that a lot of these issues are sports stadium welfare is like this because while it's a huge amount of money that goes to this stuff, every individual taxpayer, it's only a couple cents or a couple dollars or $20 out of their yearly tax bill. They don't really see it. They don't really feel it per se. Global warming, climate change, whichever one you want to call it, is the same kind of thing. It's very easy to not really care and just keep pouring carbon into the atmosphere when you're not really feeling it's one of those things where there is an environmental cost, but it builds up slowly over time. It's like the old Hemingway thing about, how's a great fortune lost?
Right.
Slowly then all at once. Right. It's the same kind of thing where it's when the cost of something is externalized, it's very easy to not care about it. But when suddenly it becomes real to you is usually when it affects you. So either you're reading about Darryl Talley, who you feel a personal connection with because you're a Buffalo Bills fan, and he was the heart and soul of something you cared about. And suddenly, even though maybe you don't know him, that story became personal to you.
Right.
With climate change, when Hurricane Sandy hit, suddenly it became personal to a lot of people in New Jersey and New York that probably haven't thought a lot about it.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you remember the Bloomberg Weekly cover.
No, I don't.
So I think there was one where it just showed the flooded subways, and it was climate change is here. Let's stop effing around about this now. And that's one of those things where when it touches you, whether it's personally because it's happening to you or because you read a story that connected with you on a very personal human level, then suddenly an issue becomes much different.
Yeah.
And I think the really best journalism does that.
Patrick, if people want to find you and read your stuff, where's the best place to find you to do so?
Well, I'm a contributing editor at Vice Sports, so you can go to Vice Sports. You can find me there. You can also find sort of my Vice stuff and my sort of back catalog, which plenty of good features there, actually. A lot of them are still interesting reads, even years later. I tend to write a lot of evergreen types of pieces. That's at my website. It's patrickhruby.net.
Okay.
My last name, Hruby. You can also find me on Twitter at Patrick_Hruby. And those are pretty much where I hang out online. Like I said, I don't really use Facebook. I have a Facebook. I don't really use it. Snapchat, things like that. I feel like I'm too old for that.
I have tried to use Snapchat a dozen times, and I'm like, nope, this is.
I used it with my nieces. I'm again, old man yells at cloud. I understood the concept. I didn't understand why it would be interesting. Like It's sort of, I found it boring, and that's okay. That's fine. When I was 20, like a lot of 40-year-olds liked things that I thought were boring. So that's just how it works.
Right. The natural cycle of life. So.
Exactly. It is. It's a relief. Honestly, getting old, by the way,
it's
for
the
all
best.
the younger listeners, let me just tell young people, this is what you don't understand. Like, it's such a relief at a certain point to not have to care about what the latest thing is.
Absolutely.
It's actually really liberating. Like, it doesn't make any sense to you when you hear this and you're 20, but trust me, as you get older, it's actually like a great feeling to be like, you know what? I don't need to figure that out. I'll let other people have that. I've got enough on my plate.
It is the most liberating feeling to not have to care about something like that. It's the best.
It is.
So, all right, Patrick, thanks for taking the time today. This was a lot of fun.
All right, Brian, no problem.